Okay, this session is going to show how some of the company settings and user settings affect how the program is used. So the first one is called differential accounts. So if we look into company settings and general ledger, you'll see this section called contract cost differential accounts. So I've got a GL account set on here for vendor rebates. So what this is for is if you sell an item to a customer and you, of course, comes out of your stock at whatever your average cost is. But sometimes you'll have a contract with your supplier that if you sell an item to a certain customer, you get a rebate on it. Maybe because that customer negotiated a better price from your supplier. Um, but it's just a way of being able to recoup those costs, but only when you sell to a certain customer. So if I just put a random customer on an order here, and I'm just going to put on here quick code 8, which is my cross trainer, and you'll see that my cost here is an average of $946. But if I sell to Jackson, after my pop-ups, you see the cost is $785. And the way that was done, if I open up the inventory for that item and look at the price matrix entry for it, you'll see this price matrix entry. There's a box here called contract cost, but only for Jackson 225, not for any other customer. You could leave this blank. So if your supplier gave you a special cost for a period of time and for all customers, if you leave that blank, then that difference will get posted to that differential account. So what happens is your regular cost on it is 946. The contract cost is 785. So it'll debit the GL account for the correct average cost, but put the difference to the differential account. So let's just show you how exactly what's going to happen here now. So here's my item I'm going to sell to the customer, take it from a quote to a sales order. I'm going to go invoice it, but I'm going to review the GL posting, put it on account. Now just override their credit. And you'll see here now that the cost of goods was 785, which was the contract cost, but the inventory is being relieved by 946.95 because that's what you received it at. So it needs to relieve it at the correct cost. So the difference in price between those two is getting posted to the vendor receivables account that we set up in our differential. So $161 difference is going to vendor's receivable. And then you simply do an AP entry after reporting on all the different differential postings for that amount, and you go into accounts payable and post a credit note for those totals to your supplier. So very handy for certain industries. It seems like certain industries use that quite a bit, and others could use it from time to time. Okay, the next one I want to show you is sequence numbering and their colors. Well, you'll notice here on my list that I've got different colors of orders, with the green ones being quotes, purple ones standing, and orange ones work order. And some of those, like this one here, the work order and the standing orders, they start in the quotes, they all start with a different character. So work orders are starting with a W, for instance, okay? Standing are starting with an S. If I go to edit company settings again, and I choose sequence numbers this time, you'll see them all here. We want to go to the sales one, and you'll see that our sales sequence, our regular sales is just white. Our quotes are green and they start with a Q, and that's our next number in the quote. Booking orders are blue, start with that sequence, and so on. So if you don't want to use that, a separate numbering sequence for all of it, you can uncheck that, and then it just uses the same number as the sales order number. But if you want to turn that on, you can just simply check that and set all these up as you need them. Okay, the next one we have is something called variables. So there's a few user-defined fields. I'm not talking about the user-defined module, but under company settings again, there are some settings there that allow us to define the names of the fields. So there's 2 in customer and 2 in inventory. So you noticed on the orders when you open up an order or sales order, see where it says customer uh, miscellaneous is called important note. If I go into a sales order, actually I'll go into the customer first to show you how I set an important note up on a customer. So I'll go to Jackson 225 and we'll edit this guy. And you'll see that under the general tab here, I've got only ship Federal Express on important note. Okay. Now I'm going to go to a sales order and I'm going to create a sales order for Jackson 225. And you'll see that right there it says important note. Okay, if I change that setting, important notice, and resave it, and I now go into a Jackson 225 order, edit this one, you'll see it says important notice. So I get to change just a few fields, a couple in customers and a couple in inventory. And those can be edited as you need. Okay, the next one is something called use suffix to manage back orders. Okay, so all of our order numbers are starting with 000 and then go on from there, and they end in a whole number. But if I go to edit company settings again, and I go into the sales order section, and I go to invoice and processing, and I turn on use suffix on order to manage back orders, and I'll just save and close that. And now you'll see when I add a new order that the order number, go to just regular order, ends in a -0. Well, what happens there is that it shifted everything forward by 2 characters and took the 2 front zeros off, and it added that to the end of it. And if I back order, if I create a sales order and I have a back order, the order that gets left behind with the back order on it becomes -1, and then -2, 3, 4, all the way up to -Z or Z, which will allow you basically 36 times that you can back order before having to do a new order for them. So very handy for tracking how many times an order has been back ordered, and then when you're looking at sales history, seeing them all together with those different sequence numbers on them. Okay, the next one we're going to talk about is credit authorization. So on a sale, it checks, you can turn on credit authorization, so it checks to see if the customer has credit. Well, there's several different stages that an order goes through, and some companies want to check that credit in different ways. So if we go to company settings, sales orders, invoice processing, we can turn on credit authorization to start with, but we can also have it check credit limit when processing an order. So I can create an order and I can save an order without having a credit problem. But when I go to process it, then it will want me to put an override on their credit if I'm allowed to. We can also have it so it disables their credit when over their terms, not just over their limit. We can also check it so that it checks these credit when they save the order. So not only on processing, but you can't even save an order without checking the credit first. If you turn both of those off, but leave the credit authorization on, then it only checks the credit at invoice time. So that's usually too late. So that's why you want at least processing turned on. And then lastly, this setting here is to check credit based on order quantity. So if you have $1,000 order, but most of it's back ordered and you're not really shipping anything significant, the credit checking normally takes place on what you can ship today. But if you wanted to check the whole order so you can get it approved for the whole thing instead of waiting piece by piece, you turn that on and it checks it on the order quantity. Okay, the next one we're going to look at is surcharges. So if we go into sales and we create a new sales order, and we put some parts on here, not just throw anything on there at all. Turn this into an order instead of a quote. Okay, so now you'll see that there's no shop fee charge, so that's the service charge. But if I add in labor, then a $5 shop fee got charged. So that's our minimum charge is $5. But if I change this to quantity 2, it jumps to 10. And if I change this to quantity 123, it stops at 50. So we've set it up in surcharges to have that. So the way we did that is under Edit Company Settings again. We have under Sales, Surcharges. There we have a minimum charge of $5, a maximum charge of $50. The GL account we chose is 41609, and the GL account we've got set for just called order fee. But this can be things like fuel surcharge or shop supplies or anything. So if I change this now to fuel surcharge, and then we save that, and then you also notice that it didn't charge the shop fee when I sold the part to them, but only charged it when I sold the labor. So if I go to Edit and I choose Product Codes, just widen that out, you'll see that the 5% surcharge is only charged on labor grouping or the labor product grouping, product code, but not on anything else. And that's how we did that. So just simply by editing this one, we could set the rate that we charge it. Okay, we go back into our sales order now. Let's go to another one. And we saw we changed that to fuel surcharge, and you see now it does indeed say fuel surcharge on the bottom there. Okay, the next setting I want to show you is messages. So under company settings, and I go to sales orders again and messages. So this message of sell price is too low, I can decide whether to display, and I can customize this message, take out the exclamations, or I can add whatever I want in this field here for what warning message is given to the customer or to the person selling the product. I can tell it whether to display it in sales orders and POS or not. I usually just have it in sales orders. It slows down POS. Typically they are scanning product and pricing is pretty set. We've also got a couple more messages here. Display warning when POS overcommits inventory. So normally at POS time, something comes in, it goes overstocked, and you going into the negative, it doesn't warn you because if the person's standing in front of the counter with it, you actually obviously do have it. You just haven't received the inventory for it yet. So you typically want to turn that off because it slows down again POS. And then the last one we've got is whether to display a warning when a duplicate purchase order is used from a customer. So they quote you a PO number and you try and put that PO number in again, then it will give you a warning message on the top of the sales order that the customer has already used that PO number. This just prevents orders from getting put in twice when they shouldn't be. Okay, next is default markup percentage. So if you have a multi-warehouse situation and your head office stocks most of the product and sends product to the satellite stores when required, and you'd like to mark that up when you transfer it because of the cost of warehousing. So you add a percentage to it. So again, under Edit Company Settings, and under in this case under inventory, we have right here a transfer markup GL account and a transfer markup percentage. And in this case, I've got it set to 21900, which is called interdepartmental transfer. So then I got default to 5%. So then when I do an inventory transfer, so I can do that from here. I'll just grab a few items off the list and hit adjust and transfer. I can also get at it from under inventory and adjustments. So in this case, I'm going to go from Vancouver to Toronto. So sorry, Vancouver to Toronto. I have location accounting turned on here as well. That's why I have the two of these. And then I have 5% transfer fee on this. And then I simply post it, and then the difference between whatever quantity I transfer here will get posted to that GL account, and the cost of the items when it transfers from the main warehouse will go up a little bit by that, or that by up by 5%. So that way, the head office keeps a bit of the profit. Of course, it doesn't change the company bottom line; it just moves it interdepartmentally. Okay, so last company setting I wanted to show you today is saving landed costs. So landed cost on an item is freight and duty. Okay, so under inventory, we have this check mark called save landed cost. And then if we look at the GL, or sorry, at an inventory item, say like, well, just any one, let's look at this one called bed. You see here it's got 5% duty and 12% freight. Well, you can enter those in there manually, but a lot of times you don't know that information until the time you do the purchase order itself. So what you do basically when you receive a purchase order, so if we got an issued PO here, and we go ahead and receive all, the landed section opens up here. I put in, or I can even type it up in here, the duty percentage, 3% and 6%. And again, freight of 5% and 6%. When I receive this purchase order, so let's look at that part number there called ACM Fit Junior, and I receive that item. Sure, let's just go ahead and create the vendor's invoice. So that's an Fit Junior. And cancel that. Now I go look at the inventory. And I believe it's this top one. And you see I've got 3% duty and 5% freight, just like I typed in there. Now look at any other one, they're not filled out yet. So that's just basically what that setting does, is it just puts it automatically. So next time I go to order this particular part number, it'll automatically put that on the purchase order. So I go to purchases and I create a purchase order for this part number. It was actually a 1, or without the 2, I mean. There we go. And we have our 5% freight and our 5%, or sorry, a 3% duty and 5% freight, of which is not extended yet because it doesn't happen until such time that I receive it. And that's it for the company settings and some of the more less known settings that we've got, and because of that, sometimes people just don't use those features when they really could use them. So hopefully this helps to clarify some of that. Okay, this is a session on some of the user settings. They're not as well known and what they do. Therefore, you may be missing out on some features that Spire has that could be used. So we'll start off with a user setting called POS Only. So we look at a user and we edit them. Under General, you'll see right here, POS Only. So if I set this to POS Only here. Then what happens is this user logs into Spire and they only get access to the point of sale and then of course the customer's inventory. So they get no other part of the program. They don't even see any other part of the program. So it's just a way of blocking some of the users that really don't need to see the rest at all. Okay, so this next section is on something called restricting. So we can restrict a user to a certain location. So if we got location accounting turned on in Spire, which there's a separate video and separate section on, or restrict them to a certain sales code, salesperson code, or a certain territory. So if I look at user David, and I look under general, and I change his setting to be Toronto, actually set to Toronto. And then I'm also going to go down to salesperson, and you'll see that he is already set to restrict customers by salesperson David. And then we've also got territories that you can set. Same thing as customers or as salespeople. And I can set it to a certain territory, which I won't set in this case. So you can choose a territory as well. It does exactly the same thing. So now I'm going to log in as David. Got lots of stuff I didn't save. Okay, so I log in. I'm going to try and log in as Montreal. And it says you may not enter this location. Okay, so I can go into Toronto and log in, and I get to go into Toronto. So now, if I go into sales, I see just a few sales because they are either restricted by location or by David's sales code. Whereas earlier when I was logged in as Barry, I saw lots of sales there. Same thing under customers. I go there and I only see a handful of customers because they're just the customers that belong to me in the sales code. And if I go to order defaults, see the salesperson for this customer is set to David. Okay, and if I look at sales history, again, I only see a little bit here because it's only sales that David has had his sales code posted from. So basically what happens is that David gets his own little sales company, doesn't have access to see anything else from any other customers or any other sales history at all. Another small setting under edit users. I just want to switch back first to Barry because David doesn't get to do anything. And you'll see there that Barry sees two companies here. When I logged in earlier as David, I only saw one company. It's because in the company setup, they're only you can decide which companies that a user gets to see. Okay, so this setting here that I'm going to show you is just a small thing, but under user settings, it's basically whether the person is allowed to set up a filter that everybody gets to see. So I'm just going to show you another little thing here while I'm at it. So I type in the word filter, maybe it's got quite a few settings there, and there it is there. Just by typing FILT, you'll see that it's shortlisted the list of things, and you get to decide whether this person creates them. So when a filter is created, hit cancel here, and I want to create a filter. Okay, and then I want to save this filter. I can go save this preset as, and if I don't have company, then it will not. That option will not be there. That way, you prevent a whole bunch of people from creating a bunch of new filters, and there's just so many filters that you need a filter to find your filters. So that's just a feature that many companies are turning on. The next one is email settings. So if I go to user settings again, and I go to Barry, and I go under email, you can set up Barry's email configuration here. So you put his SMTP server name in here. Usually it's something like SMTP dot whatever. You need to find this all information out from your provider. The username, the password, whether it uses encryption or not, and the port number, the display name. So that's when the person gets this email, what name they see it's coming from, not the email address, but the name. The email address it comes from, and that must match the username in most cases. BCC if you want to get a copy of all your sent items to yourself, because we're not using Outlook to send this or whatever email engine you're using, you don't see them in your sent items unless, of course, you're set up with IMAP, which most people are now, and then you will see them in your sent items. But you may want a copy of all of them coming back to yourself, and you can set yourself a filter in your Outlook, for instance, that makes it so that all of the emails you send go into a folder called Sent from Spire or something like that. And then a reply to address you can put on this as well. So all the settings in here are clear. You can any settings you need to know, you get them from your email provider. And sometimes you have to talk to your internet provider too for using the SMTP server name. It's not always matching your necessarily your email provider, and that's all information you need to get from them. This has all been working for quite some time, exactly the way it is. Again, if it's not working and you get an error sending, check with your provider. Okay, the next one is general ledger posting and what kind of action you see when you post something. So under user settings and under Barry, if I look under accounts payable, you will see that I've got two things here: modified GL transaction and modified GL transaction by default. If I have modified GL transaction on, it means that they're allowed to change the journal entry before it posts. But if you don't check the second one, it'll default to just posting. The button will say post, and I'll show it to you. And then a sidebar button, they'll say review and post and review. But if you turn this on, then the review is there by default. And I'll just show you what happens there. So I've got accounts payable set up this way, accounts receivable set up with that unchecked, and I've got accounts receivable set up with both unchecked, and I've got sales set up with the review as an option. Okay, so let's just show what happens here. I'm now going to go to accounts payable. I'm going to add an entry. I'm going to put in the amount, and you'll see here at the top it says post and review. So I hit post or review and it pops up the journal entry. If I do that again, and I use the side button here, it's just directly post and it gets posted. Okay, in accounts receivable, I've got no posting options. It just goes direct away by company defaults. So therefore, all I get is a post button. I don't get to review it at all. Okay, and then in sales, most of the time I want to post a sales order directly, but once in a while I want to make an entry change to the GL entry. So therefore, invoice posts it directly, and invoice and review journal entry allows me to choose invoice. Allows me to edit the journal entry. Okay, so on our customer list, you'll see that besides address information, we also got some financial information that shows up here. So we've got things like their balance and their credit limit and their gross profit and the year-to-date sales and all that. You don't necessarily want all of that information given to a user. So those user settings are under customer. And you'll see we've got a few different ones. So it'll say view AR balance, view their credit information. Of course, you got change credit information, view their accounts receivable information. Those are all basically settings that turns off those columns out of the customer. We left them not we left them with several settings. You can show them. They can see some of the settings, as not all of them, or some of the fields, not all of them. So you decide which ones you actually want them to see. Okay, while we're in here, let's have a look at David. And under David, we have a setting that's been set. I'll just look for the word sell. So this is where you decide whether the user is allowed to see sell prices or not. So it's under the inventory. You turn that on or off. So David's got it turned off. And again, I'm going to log back in here, out of here, and in as David. Again, you see David only has one company. And I go to inventory. And I edit an item. And you see the pricing and costing section is grayed out. If I go to sales and into one of David's sales orders, then I see here too, I maximize my order, that I have no sell prices on the bottom at all, no totals, no sell prices on the lines, so they don't see any of that information. Most of this is used for people in a warehouse situation. You just don't want them to see the sell prices. Okay, default payment to on account. So we're going to go back to Barry. And we'll edit Barry's setting. That would be under sales. But if you didn't know it was on sales, you can just type in payment if you know that's what it's called. Sales orders. There we go. Default to on account. So Barry is set to right now not to be on account. And you saw earlier that those pop-ups were showing when I went to invoice something for what the payment method was. But if I turn that on now and I go to invoice something, for ship something here, pick a serial number, accept. Okay, now I'm going to invoice this, and it still came up with, oh, that's because this customer has no credit. So they've got zero credit available, and it will still pop up the payment method. But if they do have credit available, then what will happen is it'll just silently put it onto it on account. Of course, we don't want that to happen when they don't have credit. So for companies that never take a payment method, then that setting is good. You can just turn it on and just don't get an extra pop-up for every time you go to invoice something. Okay, next setting, user setting again under sales, is the setting called select warehouse when adding an order. So let's just search for warehouse. So under, yep, it's under inventory. So select warehouse adding to order. Now this is for purchase orders, for sales orders, and for production orders. So I'll leave that off for a second. Let's go into a sales order. Okay, and if I go to a line here, you'll see that my cursor started at the part number there. Okay, and I'll close that, bring my setting back up. So select warehouse is now on, and I'll save it. It wasn't saved earlier. And I'll go back into an order again. And if I go to a new line, you'll see now sitting on warehouse. So this is somebody who sells from multiple warehouses constantly back and forth. If you're defaulting most of the time to a certain warehouse that the customer is set for or you're set for, it's a lot easier just to leave that off, and then you don't have that extra tab going over to part number. Okay, so the next one is on setting cost, or what costs a user can see. So again, user settings. And this one's under inventory. search for cost. So view current, average, and standard. Okay, so if I only check standard, then they're only going to see the user typed in cost, so nothing to do with current, last price, or anything to do with average costing. So it's a user maintained set of prices. But if I turn them all on, they get to see all three costs. And that shows up under inventory, and it shows up under sales. So if I go on to inventory and I look at an item, then all the costs show up here: average, current, and standard. Same thing is on a sales order. I go into sales and I look at the cost on each line. You'll see I've got your current cost, average cost, and I probably have the standard cost pushed over further. There's standard percentages, so that's included, and standard cost. Which is right there. So it's set to 0 right now. So next one is whether you see a backorder warning when you sell something. So I'm set to not see it right now. So I'll put in an item. And you'll see it got silently backordered. But if I move back to my company settings, or my user settings, I should say, and I go to Barry, and I go to my sales, and type for back, show backorder warning. I'll turn that on. Turn that on. And I go back to my same order again. And this time I put the same part number on. Then I see insufficient quantity on hand. Some items have been back ordered. So for certain types of users that aren't in charge of figuring out if back orders are a problem or not, you can turn that warning off so it makes order taking much, much quicker. Okay, so next is overriding of credit limit. So under David, we're going to look at sales orders again. And credit. So override credit limit is unchecked for David, but for Barry, I've moved sideways to Barry. See how I did that there too? Is once I had a setting searched for, I can paste from one user to another. So I'm in David now. I went back one and I got to Barry. So Barry is allowed to. So what we're going to do is log out as David, or log in as David. Go into sales, and we'll do a new sale to the Presti Produce. Put an item on here. We'll put 12 of them. And then when we go to invoice it and put it on account, I get this override. And somebody else with a override privileges will have to click on override to be able to process this order. And that person has to have override privilege to do so, to let it go past the credit check. Okay, the last setting to show you is something called cancel. Something called edit of sales history. And that setting, gotta go back in as Barry. Edit users. And I'll just look at Barry's setting. And going over to the other monitor. And look at sales history. And we've got a setting here called modify sales history. So if that's turned on, then if I go into sales history, it's up here. got an order that's okay. So what I can do here, so all these fields are uneditable until I touch the pencil here. Now I can edit, I can add or edit the PO number. I can change or add the salesperson, territory, ship via, descriptions of items, and any comment lines, and a reference number. So those are basic on ship via as well. Um, so these are all the fields that are non-financial information that will not affect what the posting of that particular order is. So those are all the settings within users that may uh, not be well used because they're not understood. So hopefully this explanation will help some companies be able to make their operations much more efficient.